Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. This week in the news, we are reminded of just how out of balance the firmament, which some people refer to as nature, truly is. We're going to look at the once-in-a-lifetime rainstorm that New York experienced, while at the same time, California's drought conditions worsened. Now, we also have a report on the latest moves of ISIS and how Pope Francis is openly calling for war. But first, let's look at the tremendous amount of rain that fell in the metropolitan area of New York this week. More than 13 inches of rain fell in just 6 hours. That's more rain than that area gets in a typical summer, and all of it came in just a few hours. The early morning rainfall came fast and furious as many New Yorkers made their way to work. Now, drivers were stranded and had to be rescued as roadways seemed to disappear as a result of the massive flooding. Commuters found themselves suddenly trapped in their cars by the rapidly rising floodwaters. Bill O'Brien was trying to get to work. He said everybody just tried to get off as fast as they could and then climb up the side of the road because the water was coming up that fast. Now, the heavy rain spread from Long Island to southern Connecticut and Rhode Island. Thousands of homes and businesses were flooded. Boats and fire trucks had to be used in the rescues. Now, as a side note, the drainage system in Long Island is designed to handle 5 inches of rain over a 24-hour period. But that morning, it got almost 3 times that much in just a few hours. Now, this storm was part of the same system that flooded parts of Maryland with 6 inches of rain, and that's more than Los Angeles had all year. Now, the National Weather Service says this was the rainiest day in New York State since record-keeping began. Now, New York wasn't the only state to experience massive amounts of flooding. Some employees from a Nebraska hospital in Kearney, called the Good Samaritan Hospital, witnessed firsthand how devastating these floodwaters can be. A video posted online taken by the security cameras shows the moments just before midnight when a 9-foot-tall wall of standing water came bursting through the large glass windows in the cafeteria. Now, in the video, you can hear someone saying, "Oh my God," as the floodwaters turned a state-of-the-art dining facility built just a few years ago into a sea of debris. Now, no one was injured in the incident, and as precautionary measure, 2 patients were transported to different hospitals to undergo surgery. Now, the kitchen, however, sustained extensive damage and is currently not in use. Patients are receiving their meals from a temporary kitchen, but have limited options. Now, California would have gladly taken all of the floodwaters from the East Coast this week as their drought conditions went from extreme to even worse. California has been suffering through an unprecedented drought. Over half the state is now facing the most severe conditions. One of the hardest hit areas is Lake Pyro, located in the southern part of California. Lake Pyro is at 25% of what is considered normal lake level. Now, from what used to be the boat launch, water is not even visible. However, lake levels are not the only thing disappearing because of the drought. On a parched citrus farm in Central California, Sean Stevenson is bulldozing a third of his orange trees. Stevenson commented, "When these trees are gone, they're not going to use any more water, so I can put that water on another crop." Now, the 4th-generation farm has already laid off part of its staff and worries that another year as dry as this current one would completely put them out of business. California went from 36% exceptional drought to a whopping 58%. Now, Stephanie Castle, a UC Irvine hydrologist, said it doesn't impact just the state of California. It impacts everyone in the nation and internationally. Now, a new study says this year's drought will cost California $2.2 billion, which is a huge blow to the nation's top agricultural state. California has started issuing $500 water fines to water wasters like those dousing driveways and sidewalks. And what made matters even worse this week was a water main break which flooded UCLA with 20 million gallons of water. Now, in addition to shallow lakes, California's reservoirs are incredibly low. Most of the major ones in the state now below 50% capacity. Tom Mosby from the Montecito Water District said, if it doesn't rain next year, everyone will be rationing in the state. Now, Pope Francis this week pleaded for help in Iraq as Christian-run news agencies reported that tens of thousands of Christians are running for their lives and a growing number of them dying at the hands of ISIS. Reports came that ISIS is hunting Christians, telling them to convert to Islam or die. The pontiff pleaded for peace in the region and called on those in power to get aid to those starving and dying in that region. Now, in a CNN interview, Greg Burke, senior advisor for communication at the Vatican, commented on the humanitarian aid that the U.S. has offered so far. He said, "What the Pope has been asking for, just as of yesterday, is any help by international community, and so obviously this is a great first start. The Holy See would like to see more of that. Pope Francis, you will hear more from him about that in the next few days, calling on both the individuals, but especially, he said, on those who have not just the soft power, but really the power to get aid to people who are starving, dying of hunger and of thirst in this moment." Now, when Mr. Burke was asked, does the church recognize that this might be a case of justifiable war to save these people? He responded, "Well, I don't think at this point we're going to get into what's a just war, the just war theory or not, but once again, what Pope Francis is asking for is the international community doing what has to be done in order to save these people." Now, just a few days after Greg Burke's comments, the Vatican openly approved U.S. airstrikes in Iraq. Father Jonathan Morris, a religion analyst, justified the Pope's comments of calling for this type of action by saying, "It was stunning, in my opinion, what the Pope has done. First of all, he was calling for humanitarian action over and over again. Nobody was listening. Our president," referring to President Obama, "was not talking about it, dating back over a month, saying it's a crisis on our hands, but then just a few days ago, he, the Pope, sent out a tweet that said the international community has a responsibility, and listen to this, he said, to protect religious minorities." Now, how do you protect against terrorists who are trying to kill you? Father Jonathan continued, "Well, obviously, military force sometimes is necessary. And that's not a departure from Catholic or Christian doctrine," he said. "If somebody breaks into your home with a gun, you use whatever amount of force is necessary to stop them. Hopefully not having to kill them, but sometimes," he said, "it seems like you have to do it, and then the representative, the ambassador to the Vatican, to the UN, is calling on the international community to act. How do you act against terrorists? Again, I think it's a stunning application," he said, "of an age-old policy." Well, lastly for the news this week, we have a picture of one young girl's take on receiving a so-called blessing by Pope Francis. Take a look at this. Not too pleased, to say the least. Well, that young girl is not the only one seeing the hypocrisy, not to mention the deception and lies coming forth from the leader of the Catholic Church. Now, Yishra Hawkins has been exposing that organization that sits on Seven Hills, which uses propaganda to try to accomplish its goal of destroying any and all forms of holiness in this world. Now, find out the true motives of the Catholic Church by educating yourself with the words of Yeshua Hawkins by ordering your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how. You can contact the House of Yahweh by writing them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yeshuahawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also email them at info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another enlightening message from Yeshua Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman. Thanks for watching.
There is hardly a person at this point who has not at least heard of the Islamic group ISIS. And this week, while the American government is claiming a victory in its ongoing struggle with the Islamic Front, details reveal a costly miscalculation which may have some taxpayers up in arms. President Obama announced this week that American airstrikes and humanitarian efforts had defeated the ISIS siege of Mount Sinjar, where several thousand refugees were said to be dying without food or water. U.S. forces arrived at the location to plan a mass rescue effort, but the operation, which would have put hundreds of American soldiers on the ground for weeks, if not months, was canceled by the president after citing that there was no longer a refugees crisis. The announcement came on the heels of a conference call between Defense Secretary Hagel, National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and General Lloyd Austin, the overall commander of Iraq, to review a report submitted by a unit of Green Berets sent directly from Mount Sinjar, where the refugees had reportedly fled for safety. Despite the marvels of American technology, which had been flying around-the-clock reconnaissance missions over Iraq for weeks, what the team reported was nonetheless startling. There were only 5,000 civilians on the mountain, and only 2,000 of those were interested in leaving. The rest lived there, farming and raising livestock. That dramatically contradicted previous estimates, which set the number as high as 50,000 refugees. In addition, none of the civilians on the mountain were starved or dying of thirst. In fact, some of the pallets of food dropped by the Air Force days before had not even been touched. 10 to 15,000 of the refugees had already departed from the mountain on their own, a move which the U.S. reports that tribal chieftains said was made possible by earlier food and water drops, American airstrikes, and Kurdish soldiers who acted as escorts. The Air Force had originally planned for 21 days of airdrops, but instead they were canceled after just 7. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee.